I know, sounds like the beginning of a bad children's book. But trust me, I've watched humans ruin their financial life with more enthusiasm than a horse charging at a fake carrot. You call it ambition. I call it confusion with a price tag. And if you think I'm exaggerating, stay right here. Because what's destroying your financial life isn't the economy, your job, or your boss. It's the tiny habits you defend like sacred rituals. Now sit tight, human. This is going to sting a little. And if you've ever called a pointless purchase an investment, go ahead and admit it in the comments, so I know I'm not the only one surrounded by financially confused mammals. Let me start with a truth you won't like, human. Your financial life isn't collapsing because of one big mistake. It's collapsing because of dozens of tiny ones you treat like harmless pets. In the animal world, we call that behavior grazing until the pasture disappears. And trust me, I've watched humans graze their bank accounts with the same innocent face a goat makes while chewing through a fence. You think $5 here, $10 there won't matter. But every predator knows the weakest prey is the one bleeding slowly without noticing. Take a real example. 78% of Americans can't cover a simple emergency without borrowing. That's not poverty. That's unconscious spending disguised as convenience. I once saw a rancher blame his cows for breaking a gate he never maintained. Humans do the atisyosyai. Same with money. Blame everything except the habits chewing holes in their pockets. And here's the uncomfortable part you try to ignore. Every little treat you justify today is the reason you panic at the end of the month. The truth is simple, but humans adore complexity because it feels smarter. Meanwhile, your bank account reacts the same way my herd reacts to a storm. It empties the field fast. So let me ask you this with all my sarcastic affection. If the small things didn't matter, why are they the ones ruining your stability? Think about that while we take the next step, because what comes next is even more uncomfortable than this. Humans love illusions more than donkeys love shade, and that's saying something. The most dangerous one? Believing you're doing fine financially just because nothing exploded. Yet. In the animal world, we call that walking calmly while a wolf watches from the hill. You don't see the danger, so you assume it isn't there. But the wolf sees you. Perfectly. And your wolf, human, is lifestyle inflation disguised as self-reward. Let me give you a real number. The average American spends over $400 a month on what they later cannot remember buying. That's not indulgence. That's amnesia with a subscription plan. I once watched a rooster convince himself he could outrun a fox because he'd done it once. Humans do the same with money, assuming every month will magically work out because the last one somehow did. But your financial life isn't a miracle. It's a pattern. And your pattern is bleeding cash every time you confuse desire with entitlement. The irony is rich. You say you deserve it, but the thing you truly deserve is stability. And that's exactly what you sacrifice for small hits of temporary comfort. Here's the uncomfortable truth wrapped in sarcasm for easy swallowing. You're not broke because you don't earn enough. You're broke because you refuse to accept that your wants grew faster than your income. And before you argue, ask yourself why every raise you've ever received vanished faster than a feed bucket at sunset. Sit with that discomfort, because the next chapter digs even deeper into the trap you keep setting for yourself. Humans worship comfort the way horses worship fresh hay. And that devotion is quietly destroying your financial life. The worst part? You call it normal. In the animal world, we can smell danger the moment the wind changes. Humans, however, feel danger, then grab a blanket and say they'll deal with it tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes a decade. Here's a fact you won't enjoy. 63% of Americans admit they stay in the same financial routine even when they know it's hurting them. That's not habit. That's self-sabotage with a polite smile. I once knew a mule who refused to cross a shallow creek because the water looked cold. The herd moved on, the opportunities moved on, but he stayed exactly where he was. Later, he couldn't understand why he was alone. Humans repeat this perfectly. You fear temporary discomfort so much that you choose permanent financial struggle instead. You avoid learning, avoid budgeting, avoid looking at your own bank statements like they're predators hiding in tall grass. And when someone suggests changing your routine, you defend your limitations with the passion of a guard dog protecting an empty bowl. The irony? All the stability you claim to want is on the other side of the very discomfort you run from. You don't need a miracle. You need a moment of honesty. Ask yourself why you'd rather stay stuck than question the routines that are quietly draining your future. And before you tell yourself everyone lives like this, remember that herds walk off cliffs together all the time. What matters is the one animal that stops, looks, and realizes there's another path. Keep that thought ready, because the next chapter exposes the belief you protect the most. And it's the one holding you back the hardest. Humans cling to comforting beliefs the way a stubborn donkey clings to a patch of grass he didn't even want until someone tried to move him. And the belief you defend the most, even when it's destroying your financial life, is the fantasy that things will get better on their own. In the animal world, we call that waiting for rain in a desert you never planted in. Let me give you a number that should bother you. Nearly half of Americans think their financial situation will improve next year, without changing a single habit. That's not optimism. That's wishful thinking wearing a suit. I once watched a young colt stare at an empty feeder for hours, convinced food would magically appear because it always had. You're not much different when you trust luck more than discipline. You tell yourself opportunities will show up, debts will eventually sort themselves out, and next month will be easier, even though nothing you're doing points in that direction. And when someone mentions action, you call it stressful, inconvenient, or not the right time. Yet somehow, waiting endlessly feels responsible to you. Here's the sarcastic truth. If inaction worked, you'd be wealthy by now. But instead, you're the financial version of that colt, staring at an empty feeder, hoping the universe feels generous. You protect this belief because it saves you from admitting you're avoiding responsibility, but deep down you know better. You know that every year you delay is another year life, tightens the saddle on your back. And the twist? The moment you challenge this belief, everything changes faster than you expect. So hold on to your seat, because the next chapter reveals why your brain keeps tricking you into staying exactly where you shouldn't stay. Humans adore mental shortcuts. You use them the way we animals use instinct, except ours keep us alive and yours keep your wallet empty. The most dangerous one? Assuming your feelings about money are the same as facts about money. In the animal world, we call that mistaking a shadow for a predator and running until you drop. Let me hit you with a real number. People who rely on emotional spending are up to 40% more likely to report constant financial stress. That's not coincidence, that's cause and effect holding hands. I once watched a herd of goats panic over a rustling bush, only to discover the threat was a crow flapping its wings. Humans do the same when an unexpected bill shows up, reacting with fear, instead of strategy. Then, ironically, you soothe that fear by spending even more. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline because the can looked comforting. You convince yourself a purchase will solve your mood, stabilize your day, or reward your stress. Yet 30 minutes later you feel worse, staring at a diminishing balance and calling it bad luck. Here's the sarcastic truth. Your brain wants comfort, not progress, and it will trick you every time if you don't question it. You think you're making choices. You're actually chasing emotional relief disguised as decisions. The moment you stop trusting every feeling you have about money, everything shifts. But don't get too comfortable because the next chapter exposes the pattern your brain repeats like a broken barn door, and it's costing you far more than you realize. Humans love to believe they're unpredictable, but your financial behavior is as repetitive as a rooster crowing at dawn. You follow the same cycle every month. Panic, promise, purchase, regret. In the animal world, we call that walking in circles so long, you create your own trap. And here's a fact to prove it. Nearly 60% of Americans admit they repeat the exact same financial mistakes even after swearing they've learned their lesson. That's not forgetfulness. That's routine disguised as fate. I once watched a donkey, yes, not me, try to escape a small pen by pushing the same locked gate over and over, ignoring the wide-open exit behind him. Humans behave the same way when facing money problems. You keep using the same habits that created the mess, hoping they'll magically fix it this time. You rely on motivation instead of systems, feelings instead of numbers, and convenience instead of clarity. Then you call the consequences bad luck, as if luck were the accountant managing your budget. The truth is simpler. Your life will always follow the path of your repeated actions, not your intentions. But you defend those routines like they're part of your identity, even when they're the reason you feel stuck every month. Here's the sarcastic sting. If effort mattered more than pattern, you'd be wealthy by now, because humans spend plenty of energy staying exactly where they are. You don't need more effort. You need a different rhythm. And speaking of rhythm, the next chapter exposes the emotional anchor you carry without realizing, the one that keeps pulling you back every time you try to move forward. Humans swear they want progress. But deep down you're tied to emotional anchors heavier than a barn door in a storm. And the worst part? You pretend they don't exist. In the animal world, we feel the weight of anything holding us back. Humans simply drag it around and call it personality. Let me give you a number. Over 80% of Americans admit they avoid financial conversations because it makes them uncomfortable. That means most of you would rather stay stuck than face a truth that might hurt your feelings. I once saw a horse refuse to leave the barn during a storm, even after the building started shaking. His fear kept him rooted to the most dangerous spot. Humans do the same when you cling to shame, guilt, or regret around money. You replay old mistakes like they're fresh wounds and let them dictate every new decision. Instead of learning, you hide. Instead of evaluating, you avoid. And you call it just being who I am. But here's the sarcastic reality. Your emotional baggage is costing you more than any bill you've ever paid. You're not trapped by your income, your job, or your luck. You're trapped by the stories you keep telling yourself. The moment you drop the anchor, forward motion becomes embarrassingly simple. But don't celebrate yet, because the next chapter touches a nerve most humans refuse to admit: the role you play in your own financial chaos. Every human loves a good villain, as long as it isn't them. You blame the economy, your parents, your job, your ex, your bills, even Mercury in retrograde before considering the possibility that the real culprit might be the person staring back at you in the mirror. In the animal world, we don't have that luxury. If a fence breaks, we know who kicked it. If the trail is wrong, we know who chose it. But humans? You treat accountability like it's a rattlesnake hiding under your bed. Here's a number that should wake you up. 70% of Americans admit they don't track where their money goes. That means most of you are losing cash with the same precision a pigeon loses crumbs in the wind. I once watched a young donkey blame the herd for losing his feed bucket, only to discover he had kicked it behind a stump. Humans repeat that masterpiece daily. You create chaos, forget you created it, and then act shocked when the consequences knock on your door. The truth is simple. You're the author of your financial story, but you keep handing the pen to excuses. And every excuse you make builds a wall. That gets harder to climb each year. Now here comes the elegant irony. The moment you admit your role, you also gain the power to rewrite everything. Responsibility isn't punishment, it's leverage. But hold that thought, because the next chapter shows why this realization terrifies you, and why facing it is the only way out of the trap you're in. Here's the twist every human needs to hear. Your financial life doesn't change the day you make more money. It changes the day you stop running from your own patterns. In the animal world, transformation is simple. When the pasture dries, we move. When danger appears, we react. Humans, on the other hand, wait for a perfect moment that doesn't exist. And here's a number to prove it. Nearly 90% of people delay major financial decisions even when they know the delay will hurt them. That's not caution, that's fear wearing a responsible mask. I once watched an old mule stand at the edge of a shallow creek for hours, convinced the water would swallow him whole. When he finally stepped in, he realized it barely covered his hooves. Humans do the same with change. You imagine catastrophe, discomfort, judgment, and somehow forget that small steps rarely drown anyone. The truth you've avoided across every chapter is this: your financial life is the sum of choices you've been postponing. And deep down, you know exactly which ones. The uncomfortable part is accepting that no mentor, no book, no raise, and no miracle can take the step for you. But here's the hopeful sting from your favorite sarcastic donkey. The moment you choose action over avoidance, the entire landscape shifts. Stability stops feeling mythical. Progress stops feeling impossible. And your future stops feeling like a storm you have to outrun. If you've made it this far, maybe, just maybe, you're finally ready to stop grazing in circles and start walking with purpose.